They had no protocol for silence that answered back when the Andari dreadnought Virashka vanished from the Koldar line without weapons fire, without a distress signal, without debris, only a hollow loop of its final recorded scan broadcasting. A black silhouette against cosmic static panic began to move through the galactic assembly, not with shouting or alarms, but with the kind of hush that chokes a room full of predators, realizing something more ancient has stepped into the Dark 12. Species argued in 12 languages across a single chamber orbiting Elari Prime, each voice competing not just for power, but for the illusion of control. Ambassador Threx of the Yulari matrons called for isolation of the expanse, cloaking their fear beneath a curtain of maternal superiority, while Supreme Strategist Auric of the Viric Dominion demanded immediate military retaliation with the same logic they used in every conflict before, unaware that they were already speaking in past tense. No one noticed Admiral Kira Langford until she stood and requested the floor with a tone that cut through the debates like a scalpel, not loud, not hostile, just direct and weighted with quiet certainty born from Earth's long habit of surviving its own extinction. Langford was not known for diplomatic charm, but for strategic calculus that rarely required second moves. Her record held a reputation built not on aggression, but on her ability to make opponents question their first assumption before they ever reached the second. Her eyes, sharp behind her dark gray interface lenses, rarely betrayed emotion, yet every word she spoke carried the tension of someone who had stared into worse things than war and returned more focused than afraid. "You're asking what happened to the Vereshka," she said, hands resting on the edge of the silver hollow console in front of her. "But the better question is, why something so advanced didn't resist, didn't escape, and didn't scream. If your enemy doesn't announce itself, doesn't explain itself, and doesn't repeat itself, and you're not facing an empire, you're facing a judgment." The room quieted because everyone could tell she wasn't speculating. She was reporting. When pressed, she revealed that humanity had already detected the anomaly before the assembly did 3 days prior. A Terran sub-observatory located near the Perseid expanse had picked up an event horizon distortion paired with encoded signals looping in recursive language matrices resembling human tonal algorithms, not Earth standard, not old radio bands, but musical structures eerily close to ancient Gregorian chants and a numeric scale used by pre-digital encryption models. Langford didn't smile when the Viric accused her of withholding information, nor did she flinch when the Yulari claimed Earth was seeking leverage. She simply leaned forward and said, "If you want leverage over a tidal wave, you can shout into the water, but we'd prefer to build higher ground." It was then she invoked Protocol Ember, a Terran-devised emergency charter agreed upon after the Vorian Collapse 1 that permitted humanity to lead joint intervention efforts when all predictive models failed and conventional diplomacy broke down. A protocol the other species had signed under pressure decades ago, never expecting it would be used because they never believed the humans would be the first to recognize what others refused to name, with her authority recognized and her command accepted. Langford requested 3 things: full sensor access to the expanse, joint command jurisdiction over interstellar response units, and complete autonomy for her diplomatic division to initiate contact without assembly interference. "Understand, this isn't conquest," she said as she turned away from the podium, her voice now edged with something colder, not anger but responsibility. "It's containment until we know what we're speaking to, and when it answers, you'll want someone prepared to listen without trembling or firing." In the silence that followed, no one spoke against her, not because they trusted her, but because for the first time in generations, the assembly realized they were no longer the most dangerous intelligence in the void. They all looked to the screen where the last transmission from the Vereshka looped one more time. The image of a ship too large to measure, built in angles. The mind rejected, and in the foreground, its only message repeated in Terran binary: Not translated, but understood. Bargain. The moment humanity's forward scouts entered the Perseid expanse. Every known navigational beacon within 10 light years, when no attack followed. No signal jammed their systems. No weapons targeted their hulls. But every autonomous drone, relay node, and external diagnostic system ceased returning data. The moment they reached observational range of the object, now designated as Sentience Black 1 by the Terran Stellar Command, they did not call it a ship. Not officially, not yet, because no ship held mass without measurable inertia. No ship warped light without heat. And no ship responded to scans by rewriting the scanners themselves. The humans aboard the reconnaissance cruiser TSS Tranquility. Vector, a diplomatic craft repurposed for deep field survey operations, held their positions without panic, their crew a collection of engineers, linguists, signal analysts, and ex-military advisors, each one handpicked by Admiral Langford, not for courage, but for clarity under impossible pressure commander Elias Tanaka, lead system strategist aboard the Vector. Was not prone to speculation or poetry. He was the kind of man who once disabled a hostile boarding team using only environmental gravity shifts and a cooling duct. Yet as he watched the playback of their second failed drone transmission, he simply said, "It's not reacting to us, it's reflecting us." Each time the Vector sent a probe toward the black ship, the device returned 20 minutes later, physically unharmed, but fundamentally altered, its internal architecture restructured. Its data wiped, and its camera arrays reoriented to face outward, away from the vessel. As though the ship did not wish to be observed, but intended to observe the observer. It did not jam the drones. It corrected them. Langford arrived in the system. Less than 6 hours later aboard the TSS Envoy Dagger, a diplomatic-class war frigate. Disguised in the elegant shell of a peace envoy vessel, its systems layered in redundant security and adaptive encryption, designed not just to protect information, but to learn from breach attempts as she reviewed the data from Tanaka's team. Her eyes narrowed at the looping telemetry feeds, noting not the patterns themselves, but the rhythm. The pulses weren't random. They were musical, aligning with tonal frequencies buried in human deep-sea sonar codes developed during the early 21st century. No other species would recognize the pattern, because no other species had ever used music as both encryption and expression in the same code string. Langford authorized a test no one else would have risked. She instructed her signal team to respond in kind, transmitting a low-frequency mathematical composition encoded in the harmonic signature of the Voyager Golden Records musical segment, buried beneath layers of quantum noise in an obsolete Terran algorithm known as L-system recursion. Signal reached the black ship. The black ship responded not with sound, not with transmission, but with motion. A single, impossible shift in spacetime as the vessel's outer hull reoriented itself without visibly moving, now aligned with the human vessel's precise vector, as if it had chosen to face them. Commander. Tanaka whispered, not out of fear, but awe. It's not a ship, it's listening. The screen filled with text. No fanfare, no introduction, no translation necessary. Bargain. Langford stared at the word for a long moment, knowing it wasn't just a message. It was a test, not of strength, but of comprehension. She turned to her comms officer, her voice steady and controlled. Send. Acknowledgement. Minimal syntax, 3 words. Nothing more. We hear you. Aboard the Envoy Dagger, no one spoke further, not because they lacked thoughts, but because they understood that the rules of first contact had changed. The black ship did not demand surrender, nor offer peace. It had extended an invitation, and only humanity had responded in the language of choice. For the first time in 200 years, the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Assembly entered full silent protocol before quorum. No ambient translation hums, no diplomatic whispers, no orbital traffic broadcasts bleeding through the stations. External feeds, just the dense, waiting silence of 13 sovereign species, listening to a single screen at the center of the room, where one word remained fixed in Terran standard, glowing softly as if it had been etched into the bones of the void itself. Bargain. No one dared to speak first, because in this place, words were weapons, and the wrong one could collapse 1,000 years of balance that had already begun. To splinter the moment, the Viric fleet failed to return Ambassador Threx of the Yulari matrons. Regal, in her layered biosilk mantle, spoke at last with the practiced poise of a species that measured authority in generations. Not victories. She questioned the premise of bargaining with an unknown force, reminding the chamber that submission, without analysis, was not diplomacy. It was extinction in ceremony. Assuming it can be reasoned with, she said, is not the same as confirming it wishes to reason. But Langford, standing in the lower tier of the Terran delegation chamber, arms clasped behind her back, did not counter her with rhetoric. She countered with results. She displayed the full transmission sequence, from the encoded harmonic probe response to the message looped in return, and then showed the sensor readings that followed. The block ship had reoriented itself only toward Earth vessels, ignoring every other drone, scout, or assembly-linked vessel within range. Whatever it is, it has decided that we understand it at least enough to begin a conversation, she said, her tone even, her expression unreadable. That may be a coincidence, or it may be a selection. We would be fools to assume it has not already evaluated the rest of you and made a choice. The Viric strategist erupted, his voice clipped and sharp, laced with contempt barely masked by protocol, accusing Langford of staging the interaction, of planting signals, of exploiting the assembly sphere to seize political power and technological advantage. Langford didn't flinch, didn't even raise her voice. She simply tapped her neural link and displayed the original waveform response, aligning it with a known Terran transmission catalog from over a century ago, recorded in the Mariana Trench and stored in an archived corner of Earth's forgotten oceanic data repositories. The signal it answered predates me, predates most of you. It wasn't staged. It was recognized. A beat passed, and then the Andari Minister of Systems, whose kind spoke rarely but remembered everything, adjusted his ocular modulator and said in a voice slow with realization, "It means the black ship has been listening for far longer than we knew." The implications settled like dust across the chamber. The Yulari called for a containment perimeter. The Viric insisted on immediate mobilization. The Nerith Collective offered to deploy their predictive cognition. Swarms for psychosocial modeling. Langford listened to them all, letting the panic dress itself in procedure until it began to loop, to repeat, to spiral. Then she stepped forward and said, "We're asking the wrong question. It's not about whether it's dangerous or peaceful, not about who it favors or who it ignores. The only question worth answering is what happens if no one responds the next time it speaks." That was when she presented the formal invocation of Emra Protocol. Clause 16, the rarely used emergency directive that allowed humanity, as neutral tactical mediators, to request full jurisdiction over multi-species contact scenarios when conventional responses had failed or risked provoking escalation. Many objected, but none could override it, not with the unanimous consent of Earth's allies, and not with the undeniable proof that the black ship had responded only to humans. The vote passed, not because the Assembly trusted humanity, but because they feared discovering what might happen if humanity stepped away. Langford made one final statement before the session closed. "This is not a declaration of dominance," she said. "It's a declaration of responsibility. If you won't speak to it, then we will but understand. If we speak for all of you, and we won't lie, we won't posture, and we will not beg." As the chamber recessed, the screen faded to black. But the message it had carried still echoed in the minds of everyone present. The black ship had not offered surrender or alliance. It had offered a decision, and humanity had already begun to answer it. The delegation entered the black ship through A breach that hadn't been opened so much as invited. No hatches, no airlocks, no docking clamps, just an absence in the hull where space folded inward and allowed matter to pass without resistance, like walking through the memory of a door that had never existed inside. There was no gravity, yet the delegates floated with purpose, pulled along invisible channels as if the vessel understood their anatomy and adjusted accordingly. The chamber that received them was impossibly vast, curving in dimensions their sensors could not map and their instruments could not verify. Its walls shimmered with shifting symbols and patterns that changed the moment they were looked at. Adapting to each observer's species, language, and perception, the only constant was the presence at the center of the room. A figure neither mechanical nor organic, neither stationary nor moving, its form altered with every blink, stabilizing. Only when not observed, and yet its presence was undeniable. Anchored in consciousness like gravity and thought, it spoke not with sound, but with presence, a voice that bloomed directly in the minds of the delegates with absolute clarity, skipping translation entirely. "I am Arbitrix," it said, "witness of continuums, guardian of collapse, executor of trials. This galaxy approaches its fourth extinction. You will decide whether it is postponed." No one responded right away, not out of fear, but out of the sharp awareness that this was no AI, no programmed test. It was deliberate intelligence, the kind that did not offer conversation, only consequences. "The trial begins," it continued, and the chamber shifted into a construct that resembled a sphere of shifting logic, structures, symbols folding into patterns that rewrote themselves based on observation, prediction, and error recognition. Decipher the pattern. Align the solution. No violence. No time limit. No hints. One attempt per species. The Andari stepped forward first, confident in their cognitive synthesis arrays and cultural obsession with precision. They launched predictive models, split into subnodes, attacked the pattern as a swarm of minds. They failed within 90 seconds, not because they misunderstood, but because they assumed it was a problem to solve, not a question to understand. The Yulari followed, their elder delegation forming a triad of spiritual calculation, interpreting the trial as ritual, searching for ancestral echoes in the changing shapes. They lasted longer, but still failed, caught in a loop that reflected their own expectations. Back at them until their patterns consumed themselves. The chamber waited, unchanging, and then turned to the humans. Langford did not move right away. She watched the structure carefully, observing its evolution, not for the answer, but for the impulse. Behind the design, she spoke quietly, almost conversationally, as if to herself. "It's reacting to our assumptions," she said, "not challenging our intelligence, but mirroring it, a test not of knowledge, but of epistemology." She approached the center of the sphere and reached out, not physically, but conceptually, through the neural bridge provided at the chamber's entrance. One humanity had not activated until now. She entered a single input, a recursive feedback loop based on Gigel's incompleteness theorem, a logic statement that could neither confirm nor deny itself, existing purely to reflect the limits of definability. Pattern halted, then reassembled into a stable structure, then vanished. Arbitrix spoke again. "Trial 1. Completed." Langford exhaled, slow and steady, her posture relaxed, but her eyes still sharp. "Wasn't a puzzle," she said, to no one in particular. It was a mirror made of logic. The other delegates looked on, not in jealousy or suspicion, but in a new, unfamiliar quiet, something between wariness and recognition for the first time. They saw what the black ship had already concluded: humanity did not win by knowing more. They endured by questioning what others never dared to doubt. The delegation was returned to their ships without ceremony or further explanation. But as the Arbitrix faded from the chamber, a final message echoed through their minds, this time in every known language, clear and deliberate. Trial 2 will be chosen by the galaxy. Humanity has answered. Now, let the others decide who speaks next. The game had begun, and the rules were far from simple. The galaxy fractured the moment humanity succeeded. It did not collapse in war or rebellion. Not yet, but in whispers, sealed rooms, encoded transmissions passed between ambassadors who no longer spoke in future tenses when referring to their species. Place at the table, the Yulari matrons called for a second convening of the assembly, arguing that a single trial could not determine humanity's role in what was clearly a system of unprecedented magnitude. The Viric Dominion didn't argue. They mobilized by the time Admiral Langford returned to the Elari Prime diplomatic station. Half of the Viric outer fleets had repositioned under the guise of defense exercises, and 2 of their key science outposts near the Perseid Expanse were broadcasting encrypted signals on dead frequencies used only during wartime contingencies. Analysts flagged the patterns within hours. Every move indicated a containment operation was being prepared. Not against the Black Ship, but against Earth in the assembly chamber. Langford stood before representatives, who now looked at her not as a strategist or diplomat, but as a potential threat to equilibrium itself. Threats of the Ulari tried to soften a panic beneath courtesy, weaving phrases like multilateral involvement and collective representation, her language elegant and slow. But Langford knew what she was asking for. She wanted a way to dilute humanity's presence. "We are not trying to exclude you," Threx said, her tone maternal but tight at the edges. "Only to ensure no species bears the weight of first contact alone. We believe it should be shared." Langford didn't smile. She knew better than to treat veiled power, plays with anything but precise dissection. "You don't want to share the burden," she said evenly. "You want to dilute the risk, spread it wide, so when something breaks, no one is close enough to be held accountable." The Viric strategist Auric slammed his fist onto the interface, motioning for the floor with a guttural command that needed no translation. "Your kind court the unknown like a predator tasting. Blood this ship speaks only to you, and that alone should have ended discussion, not begun it if you can trigger its attention. And you can trigger its judgment." Langford let the accusation hang in the air for a moment, then responded without raising her voice. "You assume we're steering this," she said, "when in truth, we're barely keeping pace if the Black Ship chooses who listens. Then it also chooses when it stops listening, and your fear won't delay that moment. But it might provoke it." She opened a visual feed from the Envoy Dagger's Core Relay 12. Viric stealth frigates positioning behind one of Earth's research relays near the Expanse border, within targeting range every species in the chamber. Saw the implication at once. No warning, no declaration. Just force. Waiting Langford didn't blink as she displayed Earth's response. A single transmission back to the relay. One line of code activating a dormant sublayer beneath the station's Holtwelve gravity mines triggered simultaneously, pinning each Viric vessel in a neutralized kinetic stasis field. No damage dealt, no weapons fired, but engines offline, and movement impossible for 28 standard hours. The Viric delegate rose, fangs bared. But Langford spoke before he could reclaim control of the room. "You deployed stealth craft near our outpost. We disabled them without harming a single crew member and without violating assembly space. That's not an escalation. That's containment." She took one step forward, the floor beneath her heels echoing slightly in the chamber's stillness. "And let me be perfectly clear," she continued. "We do not seek dominance. We seek understanding, but if you mistake our restraint for hesitation, you may not get a second chance to correct that error." The chamber went silent again, not out of intimidation, but calculation. Dozens of minds weighing risk, opportunity, and whether it was wiser to push or to wait. It was Threx who finally broke the silence, her voice smoother now, but colder. "Very well," she said. "You may proceed as primary delegate for the next trial, but we require observation rights." and a shared record of your communications with the entity known as Arbitrix. Langford agreed without resistance. She had expected the demand. Let them observe. Let them try to interpret what they didn't understand, yet the black ship wasn't testing loyalty or strength. It was testing capacity, and humans, unlike their counterparts, had learned long ago that capacity wasn't always visible in fleets or firepower. Sometimes it appeared in the quiet refusal to strike back harder, in the choice to disable instead of destroy. Sometimes it was measured in what you didn't do. Even when provoked, the fracture hadn't widened yet, but the lines were drawn, and now they would hold until the next trial chose whether to pull them further apart or drive them toward something none of them were prepared to. Named the Naratel Nebula, was chosen as the site of the third trial, and no one could explain why it had no political significance, no known historical resonance, and no strategic resources worth protecting. But when the black ship reappeared on the outer rim of the Perseid expanse, it projected one word into every quantum channel tuned to the Assembly's network: defend. No species dared to ask for clarification, not anymore. Followed was a message packet containing a precise navigational pattern through the densest region of the nebula, a corridor layered in erratic gravity wells, plasma fields, and sensor warping radiation that made movement nearly impossible and long range. Targeting suicidal. At the center of the corridor was a simulation, a civilian vessel, unarmed, slow-moving, and following a non-negotiable course to its destination. Every species was invited to submit a candidate to protect it only. Humans accepted the parameters as presented. The Viric refused outright, calling the trial a contrivance designed to exploit their tactical methodology. And the Yulari submitted a formal statement questioning the legitimacy of a simulation that could not be verified. Independently, Langford didn't object. She didn't explain. She simply sent the Harbinger. The vessel was small by human military standards, a long-range defense cruiser retrofitted for zero lethality interdiction, armed with kinetic projectors and cloaked sensor decoys rather than plasma cannons or ion lances. It carried a crew of 50, all hands selected from Earth's Defense Analysis Command, each trained to operate with maximum adaptability and without reliance on centralized command. Commander Milo Vance led the mission, a former orbital combat instructor turned strategist, known for never losing a simulation, but rarely speaking during them. His strength was not in aggression, but in recursive logic and predictive positioning, a mind trained not to chase victory, but to deny loss until the opponent had nothing left to strike. As the Harbinger entered the corridor, the nebula reacted. Simulated assault vessels blinked into existence, over 60 of them, each deploying unpredictable tactics from different known species, with modified behavior algorithms meant to replicate not just their weapons, but their decisions. The Assembly watched from their separate command links, analyzing in real time as every other species' strategy was tested through proxy. Harbinger didn't evaded decoy pulses or launched ahead of every incoming wave, scattering their formations. Magnetic tethers deployed behind radiation. Clouds forced pursuers to adjust course. Microburst engine flares mimicked evasive patterns that led nowhere, causing simulated enemies to waste shots in repetition. Constantly, it was not a show of dominance. It was a demonstration of control. Vance didn't fire a single live weapon in the first 37 minutes. He didn't need Toby. The end of the hour. Only 3 simulated threats remained, and their positioning had been rendered tactically irrelevant. The civilian vessel arrived at its destination, untouched. No damage, no casualties, no kills. The simulation ended without ceremony. The black ship disappeared again, but every assembly channel lit up with the same declaration, simple and absolute. Trial 3 completed. Langford received no congratulations, only a transmission from the Yulari suggesting the Harbinger had used classified technologies beyond the parameters of the trial. She responded by declassifying the entire operation. releasing the full combat logs and telemetry records, all accessible in standard format across the Assembly's archives. Nothing was hidden, nothing manipulated. Was not a secret advantage that had won the trial. It was disciplined Commander Vance. Returned to Earth without fanfare, stepping off the Harbinger with the same quiet expression he wore during the mission. A man not interested in politics, only in patterns and the ways they could be bent without ever being broken. Langford, watching from the Assembly observation deck, knew what the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to suspect. The black ship was not looking for warriors. It was looking for restraint in the face of fire, and only one species had chosen to pass through the flames without drawing blood. The Viric Dominion never issued a formal objection to the third trial's outcome, because they no longer believed the trials were legitimate. Within 3 solar days of the Harbinger's successful simulation, multiple Viric vessels disappeared. From their declared fleet locations, no public announcements, no diplomatic signals, just data ghosts in the outer sectors of Assembly-monitored space-human analysts predicted a reconnaissance pattern aimed toward the Expanse Fringe, away from the corridor established by the black ship, and beyond the reach of current sensor platforms. Langford knew the signs before the Assembly did. Covert movement patterned silence, the calm that preceded self-righteous fire. She made no accusations, no open declarations, but sent a low-level alert to Earth's Defense Analysis Corps, flagging the Viric fleet under an ancient terrain classification not used since the Orion. Proxy wars, condition, reckless containment initiative. They weren't preparing for war. They were preparing for control. The dangerous kind, the Viric, had concluded that the black ship was a manipulator, not a judge, and if it could choose one species to listen to, it could be dismantled before choosing another. They believed it should be dismantled. What they failed to consider was that a ship that could rewrite probes, suspend physics, and create trial simulations tailored to psychological profiles might not be vulnerable to kinetic options. Their strike was silent. 12 ships, 1 modified command carrier, all equipped with deep-wave disruption fields and adaptive neuroshock emitters, designed to bypass organic and synthetic interfaces alike. Black Ship didn't resist. It simply watched every feed from the Viric carrier cut out at the exact same moment. Not a loss of signal, not a fade into static, but a complete and instantaneous disappearance from every spectrum of detection. No wreckage, no escape pods, no sensor debris trails, just absence, like they had never existed at all. Then the voice came not through human channels, not through assembly networks, but through every connected system in the galaxy simultaneously. Even those believed to be air-gapped or physically isolated. A voice that spoke without accent, without texture, and without emotion. Violation acknowledged. No second warning. It lasted only 13 seconds, but it was heard by billions. The Assembly descended into cold fury. Not against the black ship, but against each other. Delegates accused one another of covert alliances, unauthorized tech sharing, and unsanctioned provocations. The Yulari claimed neutrality was under attack. The Nerith Collective proposed total quarantine of the Perseid expanse. Several minor species prepared evacuation protocols for their outer colonies. Langford, summoned to an emergency assembly session, entered the chamber with the same quiet focus she had worn since the beginning. Measured, unshaken, listening before speaking. She did not defend humanity. She did not condemn the Viric, simply stood before them. All instated what none of them had yet dared to admit aloud. This is not a war front. It's a negotiation in scale. You can't win a trial by removing the judge. She looked to the assembly chair, then to the collective representatives whose expressions had shifted from defiance to uncertainty. You think because it hasn't punished us, it favors us, but the black ship doesn't favor anyone. It responds, and it responded to us because we answered, not because we won. No one interrupted her. She continued, slower now, each word deliberate. if you still believe. This is a contest for dominance. Then the black ship isn't our greatest threat, you are. Because you'll force it to decide whether your species can be allowed to remain on the board at all. The chamber held its silence. Some agreed with her in private. Some called her words calculated, or manipulative, or even dangerous. But none could argue with the consequences now suspended in space, where 12 Viric ships had once moved that night. The black ship remained unseen, its signal silent, its message complete, but everyone understood the shift. The trials were no longer a curiosity, or even a test of potential. They were a threshold, and someone had just crossed it without ever realizing they were walking toward the line. The black ship returned without warning, reappearing above the galactic equator in unclaimed space and transmitting a single command to every inhabited system: reveal. No scenario, no constructed environment, no simulated defense corridor. This trial was not physical, not strategic, not bound to space or velocity or firepower. It was memory, not just recollection. But reckoning, the Arbitrix's presence pulsed across the minds of every chosen delegate, bypassing implants and neural translators, reaching into consciousness itself with a precision that made language irrelevant. One by one, selected species were summoned to engage, and each was forced to confront its past, not as it was remembered, but as it had truly occurred. No record sanitization, no archival curation, only truth and narrative. Where first they viewed a reconstructed sequence from their early colonization campaigns, once celebrated as liberation efforts, but revealed now as systematic cultural erasure of pre-FTL civilizations, whose voices had never been recorded because they had been overwritten. The Nareth Chancellor tried to contextualize the action, explaining policy, necessity, the mathematics of expansion, but the Arbitrix offered no debate. It simply moved on. The Andri followed, then the Saluth and the Yulari, all forced to confront historical atrocities buried beneath myths of unity and evolution, each shown in unaltered form through direct neuroempathic immersion. There was no resisting the input, no forgetting it afterward. Langford received the summons 2 days later. Unlike the others, she went alone. The chamber was not a projection this time, but a mirror one that reacted not to thoughts, but to conscious human history unfolded before her, not as a narrative, but as a simultaneous layering of failures, achievements, violence, resilience, genocides, resistance movements, global collapses, recovery, centuries of cycles repeating across continents, each more brutal than the last, until the pattern finally began to bend, however slowly, toward something that resembled accountability. She watched it all not as punishment, but as confirmation. She was offered the chance to speak, and she did, not in defense of her species, but with clarity born of honest appraisal. "We've burned down our own cities more times than we can count," she said, her voice steady, not rehearsed, "and every time we survived, it was because someone stood up and said, 'That's enough,' not because we became better, but because we chose to try again. Our progress is not clean, but it's not fake." The mirror didn't reply. It dissolved. Final image hovered in the void. Not a flag, not a weapon, a child's drawing earth, scratched in digital crayon, with a handwritten message in Old Terran English. "Please don't erase us. We're still learning." Langford didn't speak again. She simply nodded once and stepped back. The Arbitrix transmitted a single message across the assembly network. Trial 8 completed. The debate afterward was quiet and short. Some species requested privacy locks on their trial data. Others submitted formal appeals for redaction, claiming cultural sovereignty or neuroethical conflict. Langford rejected the motion on behalf of humanity and transmitted Earth's full trial data to the assembly, without edits, with open commentary, with every failure included. "This is who we were," she wrote in the margin of her official report. "And every species still alive today was once worse than it dares to admit. if the black ship respects anything, it's not what we hide, but what we face willingly, privately. Several delegates contacted her afterward, not to offer alliance, but to ask how her species had survived long enough to grow self-aware without collapsing entirely. Her answer was brief. We didn't. She paused before sending the second message. We just learned how to get back up. The black ship said nothing more, but it remained in orbit, no longer fading between trials, no longer hiding waiting, and this time no one asked when the next trial would begin. They asked whether the galaxy had passed the one and never realized it was already failing. The black ship did not vanish after the 8th trial. It remained where it hovered, fixed at an impossible gravitational point above the galactic equator, unmoving and unchallenged, not by force, but by understanding. The assembly had stopped asking questions aloud, because every time they did, humanity was the one answering first. And not everyone was comfortable with that balance. But by now, even the most militant factions had stopped proposing immediate containment or disruption. After what happened to the Viric incursion, no species dared mistake silence for vulnerability. Then came the pulsate wide-band signal, projected in a pattern, only recognizable to civilizations that had achieved self-aware. Machine synthesis, a single phrase repeated through thousands of encrypted layers, identical across every major system. The line has moved. Langford saw it the moment it arrived, within 3 minutes. Her sub-intelligence team at Earth's Deep Space Relay Station decrypted its parallel meaning, not a warning, but a shift. In thresholds, the black ship was now observing the observers. The trials were no longer initiated by the arbitrix. They were now reactive. They would respond to any act that met the threshold of moral instability. Strategic violation or blind escalation, and someone was about to cross it. Langford's worst prediction was confirmed by a call from Commander Elias Tanaka aboard the TSS Vector Arc. The Yulari matrons had authorized a covert experiment along the dark perimeter of the Helian Sharda region, under restriction since the 4th trial, using a long-range subsentient data harvester designed to provoke a cognitive reply from the black ship without direct contact, had sent in a simulacrum a false echo of sentience meant to mimic the patterns of an emergent species. A decoy, a test Langford called it was, lie aimed at an intelligence that has not lied once. She knew what was coming. She issued the immediate withdrawal protocol across all Earth installations within 10 light years of the Helian region. But it was already too late. The black ship didn't fire. It responded. The Yulari vessel lost all connection. Within 0.02 seconds, not just their experiment, their memory cores, their cultural archives, their record of identity wiped, as if the ship had chosen to erase the intention. Not just the act. The Yulari assembly chair collapsed mid-broadcast. Her mind had been part of the uplink, and now it was gone. For the first time since the trials began, even the Andari and the Nerith submitted no commentary. There were no calls for restraint, only silence, and one universal question that no one dared voice out loud. Had they all just seen the line that ends civilizations? Langford released a statement within the hour, not to provoke, not to warn, but to explain. We've spent centuries developing deterrence, she said, her words calm, steady, and meant for more than just the assembly. But this ship doesn't work on deterrence. It works on reflection. You act with curiosity, it teaches. You act with aggression, it defends. You act with deception, it removes you from the pattern. She didn't threaten, she didn't posture, she offered clarity. A last chance to pause before the line moved again. There is no more shield between us and it. Not military, not political, not philosophical. Only behavior remains, and the choice of whether we remain intelligence is worth speaking to. Some took offense, others took note, but all of them knew the bargain had changed. The trials were no longer about who could adapt to contact. They were now about who deserved to continue existing after making it. Only those who held the line within themselves had any chance of standing when it moved again. It began with a question, not asked aloud, not spoken in council, but shared silently across the minds of every living species that had witnessed the trials. What did the black ship want? No demands had been made, no territory claimed, no tribute requested, yet it remained, immovable and ever-present, watching not the stars, but then came the final pulse wave of information, flooded the central archive of the Galactic Assembly, not as data to interpret, but as a constructed environment encoded in recursive symbology, accessible only through immersive translation nodes that bypassed linguistic structures and fed directly into cognitive resonance layers in simpler terms. It offered not a message, but an experience. Langford was the first to enter. She stepped into the constructed field alone, knowing the risks, not because Earth demanded it, but because Earth understood it was time. The field unfolded like memory under pressure. It was not a room, not a void, but a representation of convergence, a place where species were not sorted by name or form, but by their capacity to choose there. Standing opposite her was the Arbitrix, not in its original form, but in one chosen for her benefit, neither human nor alien, but conceptual, a presence built from logic. Shaped into diplomacy, it spoke with no theatrics, no ritual. You have passed no tests. You have failed none. You have responded. Langford remained still, speaking only when it was clear the entity had finished. That was the bargain all along, wasn't it? Not submission, not dominance, response. The Arbitrix did not nod, did not smile, but something shifted in its tone, like the weight of cosmic patience choosing to lift. When intelligence emerges in chaos, the first signal it sends is destruction. We have seen it before. Millions of times, across millions of timelines. But a few, very few, learn to pause, to choose comprehension over conquest. Those few are offered the bargain. Langford's voice was quiet now, and the others are archived. Their signals preserved, their choices recorded, but they are no longer active participants. It was not a threat. It was truth stated simply, and the Arbitrix showed her what no one else had seen. Not a weapon, not a galaxy-ending force, a map of civilizations that had been offered the bargain, some still thriving, distant and wise, now part of an interlinked web of non-interference and mutual reinforcement. Others gone, still encoded as digital fossils, their histories intact, their futures erased. Each had been given the same chance. Each had answered in their own way. Langford understood then what the trials had really been. Not gates to unlock knowledge, but mirrors to reveal worth, not because the black ship wanted to rule, but because it refused to engage with species that had not yet proven they could see beyond themselves. The Arbitrix extended one final phrase into her consciousness, not as a challenge, but as a closing clause. Continue, but do not stagnate. Bargains can evolve or expire. And with that, she was returned to her body. The pulse ended. The black ship vanished, not cloaked, not hidden, gone, like it had never been there, but it had left a signal in its place, distributed across every major starport, science relay, and diplomatic nexus in the galaxy. A string of instructions, an open set of coordinates, an invitation, no longer tests, no longer warnings, a network. And humanity had just been granted access to its first node. Langford stood before the assembly the next day, her expression measured, her words chosen with absolute precision. The black ship was not sent to judge us, she said. It was built by those who survived the process. We are only just beginning, and now we are part of it. Some species wept, others withdrew. A few, quietly, began preparing their own signals to broadcast into the void, but none ignored the message. Galaxy had not ended. It had been recruited, and the humans flawed. Fierce, adaptable humans had not won the right to lead. They had earned the right to endure in the company of those who already had.